Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? Here we are. It's Tuesday, November 5th, and it's 2 minutes before 9 o'clock Central Time, which is 2 minutes before 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I wasn't sure if I was going to do a podcast tonight, but I just like doing them, so here I am, you know. Come on air and do a podcast. Why not? What else is there to do? Um, Before I get into anything really deep, I just want to point something out that I experienced today and share it with you. So, whether you may or may not know, I have Netflix. Not a huge fan, but I mean, I don't like, you know, Costa Rican or Central American television very much, and you know, and it's nice to watch with the kids and with my wife because you can either go Spanish dubbing with English subtitles or English with Spanish subtitles, right? So it's something we can all do together. So it's a nice little thing to have around for like, 12 bucks US a month. Not that expensive at all. And I have a VPN so I can watch it from different locations. And this last week I noticed that they added Rambo. Okay? Now, Rambo I think is like 1984. 1982. So Rambo came out when I was 16 years old, and I would have been living on my own at this time. Yeah. And I remember going to the theater with some friends in Ottawa and seeing Rambo. And you youngsters, I mean, you don't get this. And it allowed me a window into the passage of generations in the digital age in the 20th century, which has been a century unlike any other. If you think that the 20th century is just another century, no. I watched a documentary Bob sent me today called The Lost Century. And it was about Stephen Greer talking about suppressed energy technology. I highly recommend it. It's on YouTube. I'm not a Greer fan, and I could do a whole podcast on why he did that documentary and what they're setting him up to be. They I don't know what it is, but they always set Jews up to be the great people. Einstein was not the great scientific mind of his age. The Jewish composers, they're telling us, who transformed music were minor musical figures in their generation. This is that if you follow classical music. I'm not a classical music geek, but I have a cursory understanding of it, and I think it's important. I think wind and string instruments are the bringing of the higher worlds into the physical. I think it's one of the spiritual aids we've been given. So the 20th century was unlike any other because it was the first century in which we looked at ourselves so much. We became incredibly self-conscious in the 20th century. It's very difficult for us to imagine living before the 20th century. It's very difficult for us to imagine living before instantaneous digital films, either downloaded or accessed through a streaming service, and home theater, 50-inch TVs and bigger in some cases. Surround sound. It's basically home theater now. It's almost impossible for us to imagine living prior to television. It's almost impossible for us to imagine even living prior to radio. And radio never went anywhere, by the way. It's actually, in the form of podcasting, making a huge comeback. It's actually one of the more powerful mediums in the world now. I'm hoping the same thing happens to books, in that the publishing companies get defrocked because they're horrible. Everything we talk about in alt media about the uselessness of the mainstream media, if you've been following culture as closely as I have, and I'm 58, born in 66, and more I'm starting to feel a sense of social responsibility to become a kind of a journalist and a documentarian of the passage of these decades, because I've observed them with a clarity and a multidimensionality that very few people have. And therefore I feel obliged to speak. You know, it's not like I'm holding back from speaking on my podcast, but today I became aware of maybe even a larger responsibility I have to focus in on certain things, and one of them is media. Okay? So, this was all triggered by my watching Rambo. I haven't finished it. I just watched like the first half to where they blow up the mine and they think he's dead. If you haven't seen the movie, spoiler alert. But if you haven't seen Rambo, you're living under a rock. Okay? Now, I remember going to see Rambo in 1982. I think I saw it on a cinema on... it was right downtown Ottawa, because I had an apartment right downtown. I was actually living in the apartment I was conceived in, for those of you who have read The Devil in Us. And I'll take a moment to talk about that. There's a lot of things pointed out in The Devil in Us. If you have an astute observation, you'll see that our lives are gridded out for us. It statistically, on a probability matrix, the chances of me as a first-time apartment leaser ending up at the age of 16 leasing the apartment I was conceived in 17 years earlier is nearly unbelievable. But I did. I did. And there's a number of other freaky coincidences I notice in my life in that book. Number two, the first one is moving into the apartment. Another one, I'm born July 12th, my father is born June 2nd, and my son is born June 2nd. So I was born 40 days after my father's 31st birthday, and my son was born 40 days before my 31st birthday. It's like a literal mirror reflection, astrologically, of my own birth to my father. It's freaky when you start to notice these things, and you'd never notice these things moving your life around that quickly. As I said, you know, people say, Bruce, do you study astrology? I guess the answer is yes. Because I notice these coincidences of timing and numbering. They jump out at me. And it's not like I'm looking for them, like I'm walking around with algorithms operating in my subconscious, like Data from Star Trek, you know, picking them off. They're shown to me spiritually, in a sense. And when I first see these things, they're astounding. So I was watching Rambo today. You know, good old Brian Dennehy, he's dead now. He's that big 265-pound actor who played the sheriff. See David Caruso there, who went on to a big film career, and he had one of his own CSI. He led us one of those CSI shows, I think CSI Miami. The redheaded guy, pure ginger. David Caruso was in it. And of course a young Sylvester Stallone. You know, 6 years after his success and Oscar for Rocky, his breakout movie. Now, back in 1982, Rambo turned the world upside down. There had never been a movie like that. Sylvester Stallone pushed the boundaries, and the director and writer pushed the boundaries. But even if Stallone isn't directing the films he's in, he's a very powerful behind-the-scenes figure. You don't just direct Stallone. Stallone, he gets everything he wants. He gets script changes, he gets edits to the final cut, he gets everything. Very unique Hollywood figure. Okay? And in his defense, he knows what sells. Right? But what sells isn't really that important in art, and Sylvester Stallone has never been an artist. The kindest thing I could say about him is that he's represented the heart. You know, if you look at his movies, they're all about heart, like not giving up, following through to the end, surviving anything, these sorts of things. That's what a Sylvester Stallone movie is about. But the action sequences, the things that happened in that film, nothing had ever come close. And then it came back to my mind while I was meditating. You're not supposed to think when you're meditating, but the images came in. And when you're in a heightened state of consciousness, in a meditative state, this is when you get a lot of realizations. This is when you can just see things very clearly. And then one dominant thought was in my mind, and that was, why was this movie so controversial and so extraordinarily received in 1982? I mean, in 2024, we just finished John Wick 4. You know, you had movies of unbelievable violence and sexual violence. I think that's Quentin Tarantino's signature. And this seems to be what has become art in the West, is pushing the boundaries of what is morally acceptable and going deeper and deeper into a kind of primordial unconscious. And it's not art. There's no beauty in it. There's no truth in it. Now, I enjoyed Pulp Fiction, but I don't think it's art, and I think it's a very evil movie. I think all of Tarantino's work is quite evil, actually, with the exception of maybe Jackie Brown. Now, there's nothing wrong with evil. I mean, I'm not saying that like born-again Christian. Save me, Jesus, there's something evil in that film. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's good to take in a little bit of evil in life, build up an immunity to it, because there's a lot of evil in this world. And if you have no immunity to it, you're just going to be, what's up, buddy? You know I'm podcasting, right? Did you know that? Okay, you want to say hello? Look at this guy. So, give me a kiss and say goodbye. No kiss? Okay, you gotta go down, buddy. I'm podcasting. Come on. Yeah? Okay, bud. There you go. He just likes to come by and say hello, see what I'm doing. And then I remembered, you know, what the hype was about Rambo, and it was the level of action and the level of violence in the film. But it's so tame compared to the level of violence in films now. Like I said, Tarantino. You know, you see a big black man getting drilled in the ass by a couple of rapists in a pawn shop basement with a gimp chained up outside in Pulp Fiction. Right? Kill Bill has to be one of the bloodiest movies ever made. Kill Bill 2 is a close second. Why wouldn't it be? I say these things aren't art because they gravitate toward base impulses inside of us that It's the same thing that makes us look at a car accident when we drive by. Okay? And that's not art. I don't know what that habit in human beings is. But it's not good, because why would you want to look at something that might traumatize you? It's very difficult to look at a dead body. A dead body that's recently killed and hasn't been cleaned up yet. I saw some dastardly stuff in Taiwan. Highest road fatality rate per capita in the world when I lived there from 92 to 94. And so you see some stuff just driving around. And I drove a motorcycle over there. Right? So you see some stuff. You see car accidents. You see... I don't know if the people were dead, but they were so covered in blood you can't see any skin. Like everything, the hair, the face, the shoulders, it's just crimson red, just covered in blood. I don't know if the windshield smashed in and cut their head. And seen bodies on the road. I saw a guy get clipped one night in Taiwan. And he was on a scooter, a 150cc scooter, and he got clipped because he had to move out of the way of something that shouldn't have been where it was, and he didn't know that there was a BMW behind him. And when he moved his bike out further into the lane, the BMW hit him on the front right bumper. And they were going close to the same speed. The scooter might have been going 80 kilometers an hour, and the BMW might have been going 110, 120. So not quite the same speed. The BMW was going 50% faster. But I've never seen anything like this. The scooter flew about 150 feet into a rice field. And this was up in the mountains in a deserted area. A buddy of mine and myself were doing a motorcycle ride from the north to the south of Taiwan, which is about a 5-hour ride. We'd done it a couple times before. And we like to do it at night because there's no traffic and it's kind of cool. And 50 meters up the road, did I lose you guys? I just got some sign that said OBS reconnection successful. I don't know what's going on here. Yeah, we found his body about 150 meters up the road. And he was still alive, and we went to a farmhouse. It's very scary to walk down a lane to a farmhouse in Chinese culture. This must have been about 2:30 in the morning. It was like a dream for these people. Two white guys speaking ham-fisted Mandarin, telling them there's been an accident on the road and call an ambulance. And they did. We didn't wait for the ambulance. We left. I'm talking about seeing violence and how it affects you. And we know that soldiers get trauma. All of them. Especially the Special Forces guys. Okay? And it's also amazing the degree to which we've made violence seem easy in cinema. And Stallone's played a big part in this. Okay? But let me tell you, it's not so easy to hurt people in real life. It takes a special kind of asshole to do stuff like that. Right? Because it's not normal for us to hurt each other. So Rambo was so influential that within 6 or 7 years, the Oxford Concise Dictionary added a word. The Oxford General Dictionary, because if the Concise has it, then the Large Language Model has it as well. I borrowed that term from AI, Large Language Model. And the word was Rambo-esque. He's very Rambo-esque. That's how impactful that movie was. They actually created a new word in the dictionary. And if it wasn't the Oxford Dictionary, it was the Merriam-Webster. And I know because it came up in a class in journalism school. One of our professors was explaining how language evolves and stuff. And he gave the example of Rambo-esque, and we thought he was bullshitting. This is in like 1988, like 6 years later when I'm in university, when I'm 22, because I went late. I never finished high school. And the professor's telling us that, popular culture influences language, and he gives the example of Rambo-esque, and then, he hands somebody the dictionary, whichever one it was, Oxford or Merriam-Webster, probably Merriam-Webster because that's an American dictionary, and has the person look it up and read it out to the class, and sure enough, the word was added to the dictionary. And all as a result of Sylvester Stallone playing a character named John Rambo. I forget what the middle name is. And it really wasn't that violent a movie. I mean, I'm watching it today on Netflix at the age of 58, and I'm going, I don't understand why this movie was so popular and influenced culture so much in 1982. Maybe we made a mistake. But I was thinking in the context of a person who had seen Pulp Fiction 12 years later, 1982, 1994, as Pulp Fiction comes out. And then everything that comes after that. And now it's just how gross can you get it? And it's the horror movies too. It used to be a horror movie was like George C. Scott in The Changeling or Max von Sydow in The Exorcist. I mean, they had slasher movies and everything, like Friday the 13th, Halloween, Michael Myers. That's 1980, John Carpenter classic. It's not like violence wasn't there. But those movies, when they came out, did not make a dent in what I would call popular culture. They were not well reviewed. They were like, that was the garbage you went to see. Right? The well-reviewed movies were like whatever the Ottawa Citizen was reviewing and saying this is a 5-star. It was like Out of Africa, Sophie's Choice. These were the big movies. Ordinary People with Mary Tyler Moore, Donald Sutherland, and Timothy Hutton. These were the big movies in the 80s. These were the serious art movies. Kramer versus Kramer with Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman. Huge movie. Critically acclaimed. Okay? And Rambo and Halloween and stuff like that was just considered cheap and derogatory to culture and toxic to culture. And people openly spoke this way. It's toxic to culture. And nobody could really see what was going on. And now you look at where we are now in 2024. Look at what we call culture now in 2024. Some of it is good. Some of it's really good. Like I think we started a golden age of television in the late 90s with The Sopranos. And I think it was a direct result of subscription cable television networks circumventing the regulations of the Federal Communications Commission in the United States, the FCC. And the Canada Radio Television Commission in Canada, the CRTC. If you live somewhere else, sorry, I don't know what your communication administration is called. I'm just one guy living on a mountain is all. Speculating on a hypothesis. I don't know everything. But I know the FCC and the CRTC. And The Sopranos deserves the hype. And The Sopranos takes the violence that people like Sylvester Stallone opened up and reforms it into a true moral story. And, I don't want to sound prudish or like some Christian reformer. Violence has always been a part of culture. Shakespeare is tremendously violent. I mean, the description of what Shylock demands if his loan is not repaid, Shylock the Jew in The Merchant of Venice. Yes, people had the same opinion of Jews 500 years ago that they do today. I guess this anti-Semitism you catch off of a toilet seat or something, and it's just something we can't quite vaccinate like polio. But the description of what Shylock wanted is really gross, right? He describes it, what part of the body the pound of flesh has to be cut from, and it's just vile, right? But it's literature. There's, seeing it with your imagination is different than seeing a special effects coordinator try to replicate something. And I remember that one of the big things was, Sylvester Stallone sewing himself back up after he falls out of the tree, or through the tree, jumping off the side of the cliff when the cops have him pinned down with the helicopter. And they're shooting at him, so he has to jump, and he jumps into a tree and lets the branches break his fall. He gets this big gash on one of his triceps, and he sews it up himself, which any special forces guy can do. Most of us can, I suppose. But back then, you never saw anything like that. And it just somehow, this standard just kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, both sexually and pornography. Do you know what, when I talk about this actually in The Devil in Us. When pornography originally came out, it was considered an art form. Yeah, you had to go to the cinema. Classy people went. Whatever you call classy people, but classy people would go. Behind the Green Door with Marilyn Chambers, Deep Throat with Marilyn Chambers, stuff like this. Early 70s, 72, 71, 72, 73. This is when pornography began. And it's not like there was any prohibition against it up until then. I mean, Hugh Hefner had already been to court over obscenity charges with Playboy magazine, which was just the human form. And it was just that nobody had the gall to make a pornographic movie. Nobody wanted that on them. Now, the question then becomes, are these movements and trends in society liberations? Or are they characteristic of the decay that is leading to the collapse we're going through now? Is there a connection? I'm not sure I have a strong opinion either way. However, I will point out that historically, sex and violence are rampant in decaying empires. Okay? This has been studied. This has been documented. We have these people called historians. I'm not sure they're any more accurate in their viewing of the past than our journalists are in the viewing of the present. I don't know. I really can't say. But the society we live in now is just unbelievably without limitation, without boundary. And this is spread out all over the world now. There's pornography in India. Anybody who has a cell phone can access hardcore pornography. Do you not think that played a role in the increasing number of gang rapes in India? And gang rape is a big thing in India now. And who ever associated India with gang rape? Nobody. Okay? What goes into the mind affects the mind. And all of these things have gone on. Now we even have a political term for people who are liberating people from what they can't do. I mean, we're getting pretty close to a point, and I'm not even being facetious when I say this. Two people may be able to enter into a contract. There might be a few stipulations, like it has to be notarized by a lawyer, or it has to be witnessed by a lawyer. But once been quiet all day. But once you get all your documents in order, and everything is in order, well, somebody's here. I don't know who it is. $9:30. ¿Quién es? Hola. I don't know. I think it's just the cats. Anyways, see, these little things just throw me, though. All right, I'm not working off of notes. This is just all off the top of my head, and I get thrown with the... So, we may be very close to a circumstance where two people can come to an arrangement, get it legally notarized, registered in a courthouse, and that arrangement could be something as vile as one person consents to be tortured and murdered by another person, whatever motive they might have. Like that other person is going to give $1 million to the victim's poor family, and that will be legal because two adults have entered into a consensual agreement. Now, when I say that out loud, you go, Bruce, you're crazy. But think about it in context to what I've just explained from Rambo in 1982 and The Green Door and Deep Throat and early pornography to where we are now. And how absurd does it really sound in that context? Okay? Degeneracy and these demonic activities move in a way that you never catch them moving and say, hey, there's the devil. It's like trying to watch the hour hand move on a clock. You can see the second hand move, and you can see the minute hand move once every minute, but you can't really see the hour hand move. The mind and the eye cannot see it move. Okay? And that's the way the devil moves, like the hour hand. You know that old expression, people are having a good time and they look up and they see the clock and they go, where did the time go? You could say the exact same thing and substitute morality for time. Where did the morality go? And nobody sees it going anywhere. And remember, I'm not a super moral guy to begin with. So this is kind of an odd thing for me to be talking about. Now, I'm not immoral, nor am I amoral. What I mean when I say I'm not a super moral guy to begin with is that I never thought that forced morality or societal standards or religious standards were important. I don't think I was right. I think now, after this revelation, after watching Rambo and meditating for a couple hours and having this flood of connectivity in my consciousness, I think I'm wrong. I think moral standards are important. And I think that losing those moral standards has created a lot of chaos. When you go back and you watch the original Godfather with Robert Duvall and Marlon Brando, James Caan, Al Pacino, all they were really into was gambling and prostitution. That's how they built their empires. These vices that, as the Don said himself, we make our living in vices that have always been a part of human civilization. They're just illegal right now, and because of that illegality, we can make a lot of money doing them. And because the industry that they were in was outside the purview of justice and policing, they had to police themselves. And because they couldn't maintain jails, they had a couple options. If they could sit down with another family and come to a conclusion about something, then the bosses of the families could assign and order fines be paid from one family to another for violating the mafia rules. Failing that, they would kill the person. It would be a death sentence, and it's not like that's a huge karmic thing either in their world, because everybody who enters into that world knows that those are the rules, and if you break the rules, you could get killed because they can't afford jails, and they're not in the business of rehabilitation. That was the world of the mafia, as depicted in, I guess, the first Godfather would have represented the United States in the 50s, maybe the 70s, and I go by the cars. Well, maybe it was the 50s. You know, when he gets shot outside the fruit stand, that looks like an old 1950s car. Anyways, who cares? You know what I'm getting at, right? And you look at organized crime now. And it's, it's not, as Don Corleone said, just the vices that have always been here but society frowns upon. No, man, now it's abducting human beings and selling them into sexual service. Now it's roaming. Do you know that in Ukraine they have roaming organ tents now, and doctors working there now? There's a huge multi-million, maybe billion-dollar, I don't know. I could be just talking out my ass there, I don't know. So I got to be careful with the hyperbole. But it's got to be tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, right? They're organ harvesting the soldiers who get, some of them could be saved. Those same medical tents that are harvesting the organs could save the soldier's life, but they just decide to kill him and sell the organs. Yeah, that's going on in the Ukraine. Now, who do you think might be behind that? It's a pretty ghoulish place, that Ukraine. It was ranked the most corrupt country in the Western Hemisphere, and maybe the whole world, by the way. And that's the country we've decided to stake our flag in and defend against the evil Russians, who do have ideals on empire. Let's be totally straight up about that. They absolutely do have intention to expand and be empire again. Whether they realize it or not, anybody could have an opinion on, I don't know. All this because Netflix added Rambo. They did a fourth one in 2008. First Blood is the first one, and then Rambo is 2008. Kind of interesting, actually. The 2008 one takes place in Burma. It might actually be the best and the most morally relevant. Now, all of this moral decay is leading somewhere. It's absolutely, unequivocally leading somewhere. It's either going to lead to our demise or something else. Now, I want you to consider something else in context to the show I'm doing tonight, and specifically in context to the things that I've pointed out tonight. If I were having a coffee with you somewhere and I were to say out loud, out of the blue, without the context you've had over the last 41 minutes of the Talamanca Review, if I were to just say, I don't think we need to bring them in over here in the West, but I don't see the big issue with burqas in the Middle East. Or I don't see the big issue with their moral strictures around family and marriage and how they police human sexuality. What do you think's going on in these drug-free zones now in Los Angeles and Vancouver and Portland? It's just ass fucking and getting high is basically, it's sodomy and drugs and violence. It's like the ninth circle of hell raised up onto the planet. People say hell doesn't exist. Of course it exists. Of course there has to be an astral hell region. If there wasn't an astral hell region, we would not be able to produce hell on the physical plane. Think about it. But I guess you have to be able to think about it multidimensionally. You have to have a few decades of meditation, a lot of inner experience. You have to understand that the imagination is real. Of course there's hell. It's just not permanent. But you look at the state of our society now, and you think about the show I tried to do last night. And by the way, when I did that show, I did not realize that those streams were being stopped by YouTube for violating, copyright or something. I don't think Tucker Carlson would mind me playing 10-minute clips from his 2-hour and 38-minute interview with Chris Moritz, who just wrote a book about the fall of California. I don't think Chris Moritz, the author, would mind very much either. Apparently YouTube had a problem with it. And that's kind of the problem right now, too, isn't it? And then to add insult to moral injury with the decay of our societies in the West, we now have this false piety and this false virtue. These people champion non-moral issues. They champion degeneracy as though it's a moral issue. In the first year of the Ukraine conflict, I saw a story that circulated for 3 or 4 days through American media. I shit you not, they actually ran this story, and in many instances as a lead story. They said that the situation in Ukraine was dire for transsexuals, for transgenders. And they interviewed a few of them. The transgender experience of being Ukrainian under assault from Russia. Really? Mothers being raped and murdered, children being killed. Every able-bodied man who might otherwise raise a family and take care of a woman and children being killed, but the issue is the transgenders. This is how far we've gone. And, I can still talk about it. There are a handful of people who understand what I'm saying, but If you don't individuate yourself by anchoring your own consciousness in the divine, and what I mean by that is getting a foothold in reality independent of what society projects at you. If you don't do that, you're just going to be swept away with the current of whatever is popular in your society. You're not going to have any moral discernment. You're not going to have any judgment. It's really quite something how quickly this stuff gets out of hand. Because 1982 to 2024 is not that long. Okay? Rambo to John Wick 4 is not that long. Rambo to Pulp Fiction is not that long. Rambo to Kill Bill is not that long. 20 years. And remember, when the kid, the social consciousness, the idea of what is normal begins with what is normal in the society, what the adults are going to see at the cinema, or what they're raving about on review sites and YouTube reviews when the children are coming of age. Now, I tried to think, where did I first see violence in cinema? Okay? Now, you look at something, you look at a masterpiece like Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. And it is a masterpiece, and the reason it's a masterpiece is he worked off of a masterpiece. And the masterpiece he worked off of was a 1905 novella called Heart of Darkness by a Polish merchant marine named Joseph Conrad, who wrote in English. And that was the basis of Apocalypse Now. In the novel, Mr. Kurtz is not a colonel. There's no war going on. Mr. Kurtz is the boss of a rubber plantation in the Amazon who's been living with natives. Okay? And has come to believe he's a god living with these natives. Hence the Heart of Darkness. But Apocalypse Now, when you think back on it, there's no excessive violence. Think of the Magnificent Seven in the 50s or 60s, whenever it was made. I think it was made in the 60s. Yul Brynner, Charles Bronson, James Coburn. I forget who the other actors were. I mean, people get shot and stuff, but they just sort of spin around and fall down. There's not a lot of special effects with the blood. And this is one of the things that Rambo took a bit further. It got a bit bloodier. I think there's a special kind of karma for people who lower the public standard this way, like Sylvester Stallone. I'm not saying he's a bad person, but there has to be a certain kind of incarnational karma associated with making your living through the opportunism of degrading standards nobody else will cross, even though there's no enforced moral law about it. Like you can't go to jail. It's not like Iran. And getting back to that, you know, the perennial question any father would have to ask himself today is, when your daughter's 18, would you rather she was a virgin in a burqa waiting to be married and have children, or would you want her on OnlyFans? And those are the two polarities. I'm not saying either one is good. I'm not saying the burqa is good. I'm not saying OnlyFans is good. But for a Muslim, the burqa is good. And for these liberal, you know, if Chelsea Handler had daughters, she would be applauding them for going on OnlyFans. Like, where is the morality? It isn't there. How did we get to this point? Rambo. Rambo, the green door. Behind the green door. Right? Deep Throat. That's how we got here. And then nobody ever looks at this stuff. While it's going on, nobody ever peels it back and takes a good look at it. So Hugh Hefner was protected, and Hugh Hefner was protected because he was probably a CIA asset. He was probably an early Jeff Epstein. Okay? So, a more modest Jeff Epstein. But recently, a TV series came out. I forget what network it was on, and I forget the exact title, but it was something to the effect of The Truth of Playboy. And they're interviewing exes of Hugh Hefner's in their 50s and early 60s now. Right? Now, Hef would be over 100 if he were still alive. But Hugh Hefner became so degenerate, he was... even to say it is to contribute to the degeneracy of podcasting. I'm not sure I want to do that, but let's just say bestiality. You know, his girlfriends would catch him with dogs. Now, can you imagine having the most young, beautiful women in the world, like world-class beauties, that Saudi oil sheikhs would line up to pay $500 million to marry? And Hugh Hefner is surrounded by these women, but he's so oversexed and he is so stymied his own natural sexuality that to get kicks, he has to have sex with a dog. He has to penetrate a dog. I want you to really think about that, not graphically or visually, but I want you to think about this idea of moral standards and what they represent and what taking them away represents. You know, in a weird way, this is the best podcast I've done on the election, even though I never mention the election. But this is really what this election is about. And it's kind of ironic that a creepy guy like Trump would be, he's like the old Don in The Godfather, right? But where do you think Kamala Harris wants to take us next? She would get us pretty close to that contract where you can legally torture and kill someone because you entered into a consensual contract. And I hope the day never comes when you look back on this podcast and go, oh my God, Bruce was right. I hope it doesn't come. But it is not absurd to speculate it based on the trajectory we've seen from Rambo to now. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.